Welcome back to Taiwan Outlook. Our guest today is Mr. Khedroob Thondup, and he's a member of Tibetan Parliament in Exile. Khedroob, we've been talking about China's accusation of His Holiness Dalai Lama of conspiring the uprising in March. What's your response to that kind of accusation?
Well, let me give you some personal, opinion, all right? So, March 11th, you see, I flew back from Delhi to Taipei, right? And on the 11th, actually the uprising started on the 10th, right, with some peaceful protests. And on the 11th, Dharamsala called me and said, do you have any information? Because Dharamsala had no idea.
No idea.
Right, so what I did was, I called Lhasa. And I got first-hand information from a friend of mine in Lhasa who told me, okay, such and such has taken place, and they have started to arrest people and shoot people and do these kind of things. So, you see, basically what the Chinese always do is, they are to blame, but they never can accept this blame. So they have to shift the blame always to their opponent.
That's right.
Right? And let me tell you, at this time, the National People's Congress in Beijing was taking place, and all the topmost Tibetan leadership was in Beijing. Okay? So in 1989, when similar riots took place, I was in Beijing. So over breakfast, people officials from the Chinese government came to me and said, have you heard the news? So I said, what? They said, riots have taken place in Lhasa. I said, but I don't know such thing. They said, but then you're responsible because you are remote controlling the whole situation in Tibet from India.
So that's their belief.
That's what they think. That's why they say everything is always instigated by the Dalai Lama and by the Tibetan government in exile. They're remote controlling the situation.
But what surprised a lot of people outside is that people expect that Beijing will be taking a more peaceful means in dealing with the issue before the Summer Olympic Games, which will be held in August. But this time, China shocked the world by using the military force. Why did China decide to use the military force?
I think this is very much for internal politics, because Tibet is one of the so-called 56 minorities, right? So if they act very lenient with the Tibetans, this would have a domino effect on the other minorities.
But isn't that the case, all these years,
Yes, but China has always been very, have a strong hand rule in Tibet. They will never do anything lenient inside Tibet, you see. So this has always been the case. So in 1989, you see, when this happened, Hu Jintao was the, chairman of the Tibetan Autonomous Region, right? He was the party secretary. And in 1990, I met him in Beijing, and I asked him, why did you crack down in 1989? And he said, my hands were tied because I asked Beijing, and Beijing said, crack down.
I see.
So this was the big, prior to Tiananmen, all right? This happened I think in March.
In March.
Yeah. All right. So this time, you see, the top leadership was in Beijing, and the first thing they did was they asked Hu Jintao. So Hu Jintao said, crack down. So you see, in '89 he said he was not responsible, but this time he was definitely responsible for all the situation inside Tibet.
But the image that many people have about Hu Jintao was that he is quite pragmatic, quite gentle, actually. So, are you saying that he's a person with different faces when it comes to different issues?
Well, there are many reports on him, but from what we found out in 1990 when we met him, he was pragmatic. He was a technocrat, and he had a photographic memory because he had all the facts and figures on the tip of his fingers. You see, he knew everything, right? But then he told us that he had a very difficult time in Tibet because everybody in Tibet was too leftist or too rightist.
Too rightist.
You see? So he said he could not operate in Tibet, so he had to come back to China and ask to feign sickness and say, I'm sick because of the altitude, but then he was looking for another job. So today, Hu Jintao, so when he became president of China, His Holiness Dalai Lama sent him a letter saying, with your previous experience, I hope you can try and solve the Tibetan issues, right? But up to date, he has not been able to do anything. So this shows that yes, he is a technocrat, but he will not rock the boat.
Yeah.
You see?
But let me ask you, do you think that the Beijing Olympics is a factor in the calculation of Beijing leadership when it comes to the issue of Tibet?
I think, you see, Beijing was completely surprised by the uprisings in Tibet. And this was not pre-planned by the Tibetans or by the Dalai Lama or by anybody. It was something spontaneous, you see. So this has given a great loss of face to Beijing. And Beijing should have, you see, cooled the situation and defused it.
That's right.
But they didn't do that. They just did the exact opposite. It shows that their hardline policy in Tibet is unchanged, and they will still continue to do that.
But do you think that things may get worse, or China will take a more harder approach after the Olympic game?
Yes, I think, you see, right now what Beijing is doing, talking to the Dalai Lama's envoys, this is all to deflect criticism of their handling of the situation in Tibet, and this is to this is because of the pressure that Western leaders are putting on China, you see. So Beijing has to talk to Dalai Lama's envoys. They are showing that, you know, they are talking to our envoys. But this doesn't mean anything, because we've been talking to them for the last 25 years. And we've always, you see, agreed to disagree on everything, you see. But then after the Olympics, Beijing will automatically harden, and things will tighten up all over Tibet.
So do you think that kind of uprising and military crackdown will continue for the years ahead?
You see, when the uprising started and when so many people were dying inside Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama came out and publicly told the Tibetans inside Tibet, stop. And so the people of Tibet stopped. Why? Because His Holiness doesn't want to see unnecessary killings, unnecessary, imprisonments and things like that. And in his letter, his first letter to Hu Jintao in March, end of March, he specifically mentioned that please stop using force and give medical attention to all those people who've been shot at and release all these political prisoners, right? So this is something which His Holiness feels is very important, and I think Tibetans in Tibet have got that message. And the only people who they will listen to is His Holiness.
Yeah.
So Beijing is very worried about this. And I think after the Olympics, Tibetans, I don't think will repeat this. But then it also depends on how Beijing, you see, continues to rule Tibet.
But apparently, Beijing authorities and His Holiness Dalai Lama have different views about how to solve the issue. And China has always been accusing your government in exile for trying to declare independence or to pursue independence of Tibet. Is that true?
I wouldn't say it's true or false, right? But I would say, you see, the Dalai Lama, right, and the Tibetan government in exile is now following a middle path policy, right, where they say, we don't mind being part of China as long as you handle defense and foreign affairs. But give us a basic amount of freedom inside Tibet. Let us control our own situation. Let us have our basic freedoms, and let us have a basic freedom of religion, and then also reunite all the Tibetan areas which we have split up. So this is what His Holiness is saying, and this is why His Holiness is saying this, because he feels that being in exile for over 48 years, he thinks that, you see, now it's time for him to do something for his people inside Tibet. And this is more important, you see. So that's why he's reaching out to Beijing. But Beijing feels that, Beijing thinks completely opposite. Beijing thinks that His Holiness wants to come back to Tibet and divide Tibet. So they think that Beijing feels that, you see, they don't need His Holiness at this juncture, because they feel that His Holiness has reached, this year he'll be reaching 73 years, and they can wait till he dies. So this is the policy they are playing, and they are playing that we put up the Panchen Lama and we put down the Dalai Lama.
So are you suggesting that Beijing is waiting the time to be on their side?
Yes.
And with the passing of His Holiness Dalai Lama, that things will get better?
Yes. Beijing is thinking that with the passing of time, the Dalai Lama will die and the Tibetan issue will be solved. So this is where Beijing is very wrong, because it's only at this point of time where 99% of the Tibetan population in exile or inside Tibet will listen to this Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
But after he passes away, the Tibetan youth will definitely become more violent. They will maybe become like another, you see, Al-Qaeda or take up violence. But up to now, you see, the Chinese have not been able to label Tibetans as terrorists because we are only having a passive kind of activism, you see, not a violent kind of activism.
Would there be China's conspiracy, you know, waiting His Holiness Dalai Lama to pass away,
yes.
and when some Tibetan people decided to resort to use of violence,
yes.
so they can label
yes.
This group of people as terrorists and
yes.
then use military force?
Yes, yes. So if the Dalai Lama dies in the foreseeable future, right, and if young Tibetans become more violent, so automatically they will say these are terrorists, and they just use violence to go and kill all of them. You see,
right.
and this is what China thinks is going to be the next scenario. But I think China is missing out on something which is very important, as I told you earlier, that you see, Tibetan people, you see, being the religious people they are, and it's the religious faith which is binding them. You see, and Chinese government is also thinking that after this Dalai Lama dies, they will appoint their own Dalai Lama. So that's why the Dalai Lama is saying, as long as he is alive, he will be born in exile. You see, so this is really rattling the Chinese government. They can't accept this, you see. So I think even if this Dalai Lama dies, which, let me tell you a story. You see, His Holiness has told me he will live for another 20 years, right? In 1954, when he went to Beijing for the first time and met Mao Zedong and Li Shanyan and Liu Shaoqi and all the top leadership, he was only, I think, 19 years old, right? So today, so in 1979, he dealt with Deng Xiaoping, and then after Deng Xiaoping, he dealt with Jiang Zemin, and now is Hu Jintao. Hu Jintao only has a 5-year term, right? Yeah. But His Holiness is going to live for another 20 years. So I feel that we Tibetans definitely have, you see, a good chance of seeing a free Tibet one day with this present Dalai Lama going back to Tibet.
That's right. And over the years, the Tibetan groups of Tibetan government in Exile has been receiving a lot of international support, moral support and physical support and so on. And Taiwan is one of those countries that have been supporting the Tibetan government in Exile. Right. So when we come back, we'll talk about the relationship between your government and the government in Taiwan.
Sure. All right.
So don't go away. We'll be back after this message. Welcome back to Taiwan Now Look. In today's program, we've been discussing China's policy towards Tibet and the uprising in March this year. Mr. Khedroob Thondup, we've been talking about China's policy. How about Taiwan's policy towards Tibet? Because as you know that the, different governments in Taiwan have different policies towards the Tibetan issue. So,
you see, Taiwan, inherited the Tibetan policy when the Kuomintang first came here in 1959. The Kuomintang, the Republic of China, considered us Tibetans as part of the ROC. So I don't know whether they still think that. But then in 2000, when you see the DPP government came in, they disinherited this policy and said, you Tibetans are foreigners and we respect right to self-determination. So I think this is a very important change, and for people of Taiwan to decide. You see, because you see, the Tibetan issue is very similar to the Taiwan issue, There are many similarities, But then the most important factors which I consider is human rights. You see, human rights is very important in Taiwan, and human rights is very important for us Tibetans inside Tibet, And you see, the amount of support that we get from Taiwan or from other countries, or I should say, why are we Tibetans so successful today all over the world, is because we have been able to generate sympathy
That's right.
You see, this sympathy factor is a very important thing. But this is something where Taiwan is lacking. You see, you do not have that much sympathy as we have. Because you see, we have like maybe 60 Tibet support groups in 60 different countries supporting us. And most of them are foreigners, right, supporting us. So you see, when the Olympic torch was taken to Europe and all over the world, right, look at all these foreigners running around, right? We Tibetans didn't have to do anything, right? But this is something which Taiwan has to realize, and it's something which we can work on, right?
But as you know, that in the past few months, the ruling government, the KMT, has been trying to approach the Beijing authorities, try to fix the relationship between Taiwan and Beijing. What's your view on their policy towards China now?
I think the new Taiwan government's approach to China. Yes, you have to do this, right?
Yeah.
But you have to take it step by step, and you have to see whether China will change or not. Yeah. In my personal view, the Chinese will not change. This is all pre-Olympics politics, you see. Post-Olympics will be something else. This is my personal feeling. And I just feel that, you see, if you think China will dismantle their missiles today, I think that's an impossibility, right? And those missiles are kept there to remind whichever government is in Taiwan and the people of Taiwan that who Big Brother is. You see, this is a very important thing, you see. And whoever thinks that these missiles can be dismantled is very naive, you see, or is having some wishful thinking, you see. So because, for instance, like in Tibet, the Chinese have nuclear missiles which are facing India, and they have kept them there from 1975. And even today, when India and China have good relations, those missiles are still there. It's just a reminder that who Big Brother is, you see.
That's right.
And at the same time, the government of India has been, from 1985 till today, upgrading its own self-defense missile system because they are worried about this. So that's why, you see, I think Taiwan also has to be worried and has to continue to be wary of China, because China is not going to change overnight. And you see as you said earlier, Hu Jintao may be a pragmatist, or he may be, you see, different from, you see, the older generation, but it's still that it's the power which they need, and it's a very important thing for them to try and win over Taiwan.
But in addition to its rigid principles in imposing their policy towards Taiwan and towards Tibet, what do you think about your experience of engaging talks with Beijing? Is there anything that we can learn from your experiences?
I think, you see, we've learned from each other, we've exchanged opinions, because, you see, how Beijing deals with Taiwan is a reflection of, you see, what's going to happen with us, you see. So I hope that, you see, there would be some sort of, what do you call, breakthrough this time when our envoys go to Beijing. But I think it's, as I said earlier, it's like a pre-Olympics, what do you call, rattling, right? And I think that, what do you call this, in the over 25 years of dialogue which we've had with Beijing, we've always agreed to disagree on everything. We have not agreed on anything, you see. So with this kind of a dialogue, and I don't think, you see, a breakthrough is possible.
So you just keep the talks going?
Yes. It's only a form of communication where you can get your opinion across and you can hear what they are saying. But there is no meeting point.
That's right. But in the case of Taiwan, there are hopes that there could be breakthrough in the relationship between Taiwan and Beijing. Do you think that's too optimistic?
I think that's really optimistic, because you have to judge from their track record of, say, the last 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, right? So judging from the track record, you see, I don't think it's possible, you see. And I think, but you see, there's one thing which is of great concern is, you see, Beijing is playing this power game where they think that their power base should be in Asia as compared to the United States power base. They're trying to give Taiwan a sweetener to be able to move towards Beijing.
Yeah.
You see, so this is what I think is happening. You see, and I think this, on the long term, would be harmful for Taiwan's what do you call this for the Taiwanese people, because this is not in the interests of the Taiwanese people.
That's right. But with the rise of China, people have different views about how China will react to the issue of Taiwan and to the issue of Tibet. So do you think that a stronger China will take a more harder position on some of those issues, or will be more lenient on those issues?
So let me tell you, you see, in 1979, when we started dialogue, why did Deng Xiaoping start this dialogue or want this dialogue? So when China was weak economically, they wanted to have a settlement with Tibet.
Yeah.
But today, when they are strong and they are in control, they become much tougher.
That's right.
You see, so this is completely, you see, their relations is adverse to their political power, their economic power. Yeah. So when they are weak economically, they want to have some sort of a settlement or some sort of a relationship with you. But when they become very strong, like when we stopped our dialogue in 1995 until 2003, that period, their economy improved, they became very strong, and they said, we don't need you anymore.
Yeah.
You see? So this is the kind of policy which they have.
But the thing is, there are different views about whether China is weak or strong now. You know, yes, China is rising, but there are also many internal problems facing China. And so if we have different views about what China is now, there will be different conclusions about whether China will take a harder or softer approach. Right. What's your take on that?
So vis-a-vis Tibet, okay, let's get back to Tibet. So you see, when the Tibetan economy is stronger and better, what do the Tibetan people say? We want more freedom of religion and we want more human rights. Okay, yeah. So, but what does Beijing do during that period? So they say no and crack down as they always crack down as before. Okay, so they won't say no, we'll treat you leniently and we'll let you go. No. So it shows that Beijing, when they were weak, they did the same thing. When they're strong, they do the same thing. Vis-a-vis Tibet, it's unchanged.
Right. So their policy towards Tibet is always very rigid.
Very rigid, right.
But on the other hand, there are also concerns about internal implosion inside China. Right. And that could also create some problems for those countries, neighboring countries, but also for different regions in China.
Yes.
Do you think that internal implosion would be good or bad for Tibetan people?
I think, you see, if China does not handle the Tibetan problem carefully, right, there is a danger of further implosions inside China. You see, if they allow the Tibetan people to have more freedom, that will also create